Chuck Sullivan again for the IKCA. I would like to tell you a story. This is a true story. Every word of it, so help me, is absolutely as I recall it. And I've got perfect recall on it because it was one of those things that happens once in a lifetime. This is about the very night that I met Bruce Lee. Basically, it was a night like any other in the dojo. Mr. Parker was teaching the class. We were doing our thing. We had people observing from out in the lobby area. He had like a cutout where you could stand there and watch the class. And one of the people watching that evening was a young Chinese gentleman by the name of Bruce Lee, who at the time we didn't know. Nobody did. This is 1963. Nobody knew. You see, in 1963, when I met Bruce, he was 22 years old. I was 31. This was sometime in the summer of '63. He was born November 27th, 1940. I was born November 13th, 1931. So I was exactly 9 years and 2 weeks older than Bruce. Now, at that stage in your life, having that additional 9 years on a guy, this gives you a lot of life experience. I had a lot more life experience than he had. I'd been in and out of the Marine Corps, and I had lived a lot longer than he had at that point, almost 50% longer. But this kid had a lot more martial arts experience than any of us had. I was a black belt less than a year when I met him, so I was just a new black belt, and that's not very high up. And he was showing us stuff. I mean, he was explaining how he trains and different things that he does, and he demonstrated a one-handed, two-fingered push-up. Oh, come on, that's pretty impressive stuff. I remember feeling his forearm, and I got to tell you, there was like no give at all. I mean, you could have dug your nail in and got nowhere. His forearm was like a piece of steel, and I was duly impressed. And when he was telling us about Hong Kong, really got my attention, because naturally we were interested in what's going on in Hong Kong. Hong Kong, China, the mecca of Kung Fu, right? And Kenpo is basically a Chinese system. It's Kung Fu, so naturally we were interested. And I remember him saying, and these are his words, I'm quoting him. I'm quoting him directly. He said, 95% of what they are teaching over there is commercial bullshit. Did I hear that right? 95% of the martial arts being taught in Hong Kong in the early 60s was, in Bruce Lee's opinion, commercial bullshit? Wow. But then he went on, and he said, and of the other 5%, he says, half of them are trying, but they don't know what they're doing. Now I'm like, wait a minute. That's 97.5% of everything that's being taught. So that left like 2.5%. And we asked, well, how about those guys? He says, those guys really know what they're doing. Bruce said this funny way with English. Anyway, and I remember, thinking at the time, well, wow, how do you get to, train with those guys? He says, you don't. It's as simple as that. You don't. He says, you guys wouldn't get down the alley alive where they have their classes. They don't have classes. He says, they're not a school. They're more of a society. And I'm thinking, yeah, like Triad. Secret societies. And non-Chinese, forget about it. In fact, even most Chinese. I mean, Bruce had some connections. Bruce had some people that he knew, and they liked him, and he was able to get in and see these guys, and he learned some things from them, but not right away. Anyway, it was really, I mean, this was some mind-blowing stuff from an insider, a guy that was there. I was enthralled, I really was, with this kid, okay? And then he dropped the bomb, and he said, I was watching what you were doing earlier, and he says, and you were doing this, and he showed us something we were doing, whatever it was, and he did it beautifully. I mean, he did it like he had been in the class forever. I mean, not just that night. He was a guy that was just an observer, And yet he did the move, whatever it was. I wish I could remember what it was, but it's really not that important. But what he said next was important. He says, "Why were you doing that?" And, I mean, what kind of a question is that? He knew why we were doing that. We were doing that because Ed Parker was teaching that. And one of us, I don't think it was me, one of us said, "Well, what do you mean? Why were we doing it?" He says, "Oh, I don't know." He says, "Because it was wrong." Say what? It was wrong. What do you mean? What do you mean? I saw Dave Hebler like grow 3 inches in height, and he looked at me like, "You want him or should I take him?" I'm going to grab him by the neck and shake him until his shoes fall off. And I said, I was kind of like, "Well, wait a minute. Let's see what he has to say first." But he went right on. He just kind of passed over our shock because he knew he would caused it. So, but this kid was something else. He really was. And he said, "Well," he says, "here's the problem." And he showed us what the move was, and he showed us why it actually violated a principle. It was a bad move, and it was something that we were learning in the class with Ed Parker. So, what do you say to that? Really, I mean, what can you say to that? Let me say this about that. It was something that someone with a lot of knowledge and a lot of guts was able to stand there and observe. And if I was to go into somebody's class right now and observe it, I'm sure I could come away with 2 or 3 or maybe more things that I would say, that's really not good, or this and that violates the principle and so on. But I had never even thought along those terms. I'd never even thought along those lines. And on my drive home that night, I said to myself, how come he could do that and I can't? I was frankly irritated with myself. How come he did that? He was able to do that and I can't. And then all of a sudden I realized, it isn't that I can't. It's just that I never even thought of it. I never thought of questioning anything that Ed Parker was teaching us. Because when I started the art, I knew nothing. And Ed Parker knew everything. Everything, or so it seemed. And it taught me something very, very important that night. Bruce Lee taught me not to take anything at face value from anyone. Because if somebody knows even a little bit more than you do, you have no way of knowing if what they're telling you is good, bad, or ugly. You have no way of knowing that. So consequently, you're in the dark. And from that time on, I said, I am not going to take anybody's word for anything. I will take everything under advisement. Now, some things it doesn't matter. Somebody tells you something that's like, okay, fine, I'll accept that because who cares? But there's some things you do care about. And the martial arts is one of them. I care about this. I care deeply about it. And I want to know if what somebody is showing me is good, bad, or ugly. Now, the thing that he picked out, let me say this about that. It did not destroy my confidence in the system. Not at all. It was like, okay, so there's one thing. I've found a few others since then. And I just throw them out. I just eliminate them. I won't teach them. Once I find a move that, or something, I could go into specifics, but it's unnecessary. And once I find that, then it's like, okay, we just won't do that anymore. We won't teach that anymore. Because I don't want people to develop that as a habit and find out one day that they break a bone because of it. So it didn't destroy my confidence in the system, but it sure woke me up. That this kid could come in there and cause the kind of ripples that he did. Bruce had a funny way about him. I really liked Bruce. I really enjoyed being around him for the little bit of time I was. I was busy doing what I was doing. He was busy doing what he was doing, and we never really connected on martial arts wise. But we had a mutual conduit in his #1 student, Dan Anasanto, and Danny and I used to commiserate quite often about what they were doing and what we were doing, and we would compare notes, and we would find that we were thinking so much along the same lines, But then, of course, Bruce went on to bigger and better things, and I'm not sure that was all good. Anyway, hope you enjoyed that, and I'll never forget it, obviously. I mean, here we are, 40-something years later, almost 50 years later, and I can remember it like it was day before yesterday. And if I come up with any more stories, well, I'll put them on tape too. Thanks for listening.